Before we get started into the content of today's workshop, I'm going to introduce myself, and then my colleague Katie, who will also be presenting today, is going to introduce herself. So my name is Kayla. I'm a second-year PhD student in the Department of Kinesiology. So I've had a lot of experience being a GA for many different courses at many different levels, and I also have some experience with being a GA online as well. So I hope today that Katie and I can provide you some helpful tips as the new semester starts. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Katie so she can introduce herself.
So good morning, everybody. As Kayla said, my name is Katie. I'm also a second-year PhD student in kinesiology. And just like Kayla, I have GA'd for several courses in person. And as Kayla didn't mention, but is something pretty cool that we got to do last semester, we were both professors in the online environment. So we do have a little bit of experience as both GAs and the professor role, which we'll be getting into that dynamic this workshop. And so to get started, we will begin with a poll. So if you all could respond with how much experience do you have being either a GA or a TA? Give you guys just a couple seconds to fill this out. Okay, so it looks like almost everyone has filled it out, and it looks like we have a good chunk of people who are in their very first semester, which is really exciting, as well as some who have been a GA or TA for 1 to 2, with about 13 people who have been a GA quite a number of times. And so now we are going to see what level of experience you all have being a GA or TA online. So as a lot of us realized in this last semester, being a GA or a TA or even a student in the online learning environment can be quite different. And so we'd like to know through another poll, what level of experience do you have being a GA or TA online? So we'll put that up in just a second. Okay, we'll give you a couple more seconds for those of you who have not responded yet. Okay, now I'll show the responses. And so it looks like a lot of people have not been a GA or TA online, which probably means that some people who have been a GA or TA from that previous question did it in person. And so we'll be going over specific things throughout this workshop for online GA and TA work, emphasizing on differences that the online learning environment has from the in-person learning environment. I just want to thank you all again for completing these polls. It really helps us to tailor the workshop to the variety of students that we have in this workshop today. And so, to give you all an idea of what to expect during this workshop, here's an agenda. We'll start by providing you with some steps and tasks that you can do prior to the semester starting so that you can have a strong semester, so things that you can do in these next couple of days. And then we will give an overview of typical expectations for GAs and TAs in an online learning environment, including expected tasks that you will need to complete, methods of communication, grading, and technology-related concerns or tasks. And then we will go over concerns that are specific to online teaching and learning and provide you all with resources. And so before we move on, we need to go over some ground rules for how this workshop will run. So given that there are a variety of departments and levels of experience, we want this to be helpful for all of you. And so if you have questions along the way, we encourage you to put them in the chat while the presentation continues. We will be taking breaks along the way to answer those questions, so don't worry if we don't answer your question right away. And we have also muted all of your mics, just so you guys know. So you may be wondering, I've received my GA or TA assignment, now what do I do? First, we advise that you get in contact with the instructor for the course as soon as you can. We recommend sending an email, simply introducing yourself, explaining that you are their GA or TA for that semester. And it's really important that you don't make any assumptions about what you will be doing for this course. You'll pick up on this theme throughout the workshop because every course is very different. Instructors are different, the content is different, their choice of delivering content online may be completely different from what you've experienced as a student. And so getting in contact with the instructor can help you to determine those roles and responsibilities. And so once you get in contact with them, ask questions, ask as many questions as you need, because it's really important that you feel prepared and comfortable going into this semester. So one way that you can also get in contact after setting up an email may be to create a Teams call, and that may be an easier method of asking questions, getting content, and working with them. So we would also recommend doing that. And for some guidance, here are several general questions that you can ask the instructor when you reach out. For example, what do you expect from me in this role? Sometimes you may be just grading, you may be creating content. There are different levels of involvement that a GA or TA may have, as well as how many hours am I expected to work each week. You may be designated 70 hours, for example, based on your pay, but you may end up working less typically. And so that may be something that they will tell you up front. Yes, you're typically supposed to work 5 hours, but you actually might only work 3 hours, and they could tell you that right away. As well as, will I attend classes? And if so, what is my role when I'm attending those online classes? Should I be monitoring chats and answering student questions in the chat? Do I need to be taking notes? Will I be helping with breakout sessions? And what will those breakout sessions and those breakout rooms look like? As my role, what will my role look like? As well as, will I be expected to create any course content? For example, teaching a lecture or a discussion, creating any videos that will be posted on Blackboard, maybe lab manuals or rubrics. And if you are expected to create course content, you want to make sure that you know what their expectations are for that content. What topics do I need to address within it? How do you prefer that I format it? Not just the format within, but maybe a Word document versus a PDF. That may be something that the instructor thinks is important. As well as, when do I need to upload that content and where? So we will be referring to Blackboard very often throughout this workshop, but there are some instructors who are working on Teams for the most part throughout the online learning of this winter semester. So that would be something important to understand. And then you should know to get comfortable with Teams as well. And so now we're going to pull up a whiteboard where you all can put down any other questions that you think would be important to ask an instructor. So I will put the question down.
It should already be there, Katie. I think I just pasted it.
Thank you. And so if you all can just add in the text box. So how you add information on the whiteboard is you'll see a series of icons above the screen. For example, an arrow or a mouse, then like a hand, a pencil, a box, and then the T. The T is where you can click and then type out the question that you have, that you think would be a good question to ask the instructor. So what are the tasks during lab hours? Yeah, not only what are the students' tasks, but what are my tasks as the GA or TA? Because you may find that you are more or less familiar with some of those tasks, so you might want to do extra reading or extra prep for any given week. Yeah, what's the best way to contact you? We'll be getting into a lot of communication things in just a minute. Office hours and students reaching out for help, the role in the final exams. And that may be a type of question that they may not be able to answer right away, the final exam question, but they will definitely be able to later on. Yeah, so questions like what student question should I be bringing? We'll be talking about that more in the communication, I think, the communication section. What if I feel that these tasks are more time consuming than what I am assigned? This is a really important question that I think a lot of GAs and TAs experienced in this last semester, because sometimes grading online can be more time consuming than grading a hard copy. And so we would recommend that if you are getting a feeling that it will be more time consuming than what the instructor sets out from the onset, that you talk to them about that, because it could end up being more difficult for both you and the instructor to adjust later on. And so if you do have any concerns, you should try discussing that with them as soon as you realize it. And one way to know that you are not overworking is to track your hours in an Excel document, for example, or in another method if you prefer. If I enrolled in 2 courses, then which one will I work for? Could you provide any details in the chat, and one of the moderators will try to help with that if we can. Okay, thank you guys for sharing those questions. Now we are going to move on to communication information.
So I just see that we just have a message in the chat now. So you applied for 2 GATA courses. So has your department been in contact with you to suggest what specific course you will be assigned to? Because I know from experience, like Katie and I, we get to apply for different courses, but then we're provided with our assignment. So then we know exactly what course we have. And for myself this semester, I've actually been assigned to 2 courses, but I know that my hours are going to be split between those 2 courses. So I know exactly how much time I have to provide to each course. So hopefully that should help to answer the question.
And if you have any further questions, we will try to answer it within the chat or at the next break. Okay, so as it relates to communication specific questions, you can ask if the instructor expects you to regularly communicate with them. For example, they may expect weekly or bi-weekly Teams calls. And you can also clarify with them what method of communication they prefer. Maybe they prefer a Teams chat as opposed to an email, because they might be able to respond more quickly with that method. You can also ask if there's going to be a mid-semester review, as well as if you are expected to be in communication with other GAs and TAs if you are not the only GA or TA for that class. Because sometimes professors will be the head or the leader of all of the GAs and TAs, but you may have a head GA or TA that will help organize all of the tasks. And within that, you can also ask who you should contact if you can't fulfill your duties. For example, if you get sick, should you ask for another GA or TA to fill in for you, or should you contact the instructor first? And so these are more related to communication with the instructor, but it's also important that you get an understanding expectations as it relates to communicating with the students in your course. So what method should you be using? Should I only communicate with them before or after class? What about office hours? As well as what's a reasonable amount of time for responding to their emails. Some instructors may have a 24 or 48-hour rule on weekdays where you have that amount of time to respond to them. And you can also ask if you should be notifying the instructor if a student emails you. For example, should you CC the instructor on all of the emails that you send back to a student? And that may also apply to other GAs and TAs within your course so that everyone can be kept up to speed on any questions that students have, as well as how they were answered, so that there is almost like a paper trail of how those questions were addressed. So now we're going to do another whiteboard activity where you all can share any communication related questions that you all think would be valuable for asking the instructor.
And Katie, I just noticed that we have some questions in the chat, so.
Yes, I will look at those. So we have a question asking, how does pay work? Do we fill out an hour sheet every week and submit it, or do we automatically get paid for the minimum hours required? So you will get paid every 2 weeks, and it will be a standard standard pay rate that is not dependent on how many hours you worked within that pay period. So you will fill out a contract of some sort and sign, and that should have the total amount of funds that you will receive by the end of the semester. And so if you divide that into however many weeks is every 2 weeks, you'll just get that amount of pay every 2 weeks. But you do not need to, at least for kinesiology, you are not expected to submit a sheet to the department secretary or anything like that.
But
however,
add on, sorry, Katie.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add on to your answer. I think one of the best things you can do, though, to guard yourself from going over your hours is to actually record every single hour you provide for your responsibilities and keep track of exactly what you're working on and how long it took. So in this way, throughout the semester, if you're getting close to your maximum number of hours, or let's say you already reached that halfway point of your hour within like 2 weeks of the semester, then chances are you're going to run out of your hours. So it's important that you communicate with the professor ahead of time so that they can change your responsibilities for the later half of the semester. Because I know what I did for my GAs this semester is I had an Excel document created for each GA, and I shared it with them, so we both had live access to it. So I was able to see everything they were recording and how long everything was taking them, so then we could have an open line of communication. So if this isn't something that your professor suggests, then maybe you would like to suggest it to them to say, hey, I'm going to record my hours. I can share the document with them so we both know where I'm at with my hours. I don't know if you have anything else to add from your experience, Katie.
That was exactly what I was going to say. And building off of that, how we talked about if you think ahead of time that you may have an assignment that takes longer than what the professor says, maybe you don't realize that until you have graded it or have finished grading it, and you realize that it took you much longer than you thought. Tell the instructor at that point, because as far as the instructor knows, everything's going according to plan. And so when you can update them on those hours, just if they don't have a shared document, that can be more helpful than you may realize. And so the other question in the chat is if this presentation file will be shared, and it will be shared with you all.
And then there was just one more question before that too. We might have got pushed down in your chat. Just about have I accepted the offer for the course as a TA, but I haven't received any schedule for classes or labs. So I think that's something you should definitely reach out to your department about. I know we have a graduate secretary who's in constant contact with us. So whoever you usually communicate with in regards to learning that information, just reach out to them.
Thank you, Kayla. I did not see that question, so I would have missed it.
That's okay. No problem.
I see that we have a hand that's raised. If you could just put your question in the chat because mics are off, that would be great. And then, okay, that question was sent again. All right, so let's see what we have on the whiteboard. Should we only reply to emails during office hours? That may be something that the instructor prefers, that students know that that's the only time for communicating, or they may say to respond to emails telling students, I won't be responding to this email, but I'm happy to answer your question during office hours instead. Do you want to have weekly video chat or email update for how things are going? As well as what is the minimum hours paid bi-weekly? I seem to have less than 20 hours per week. I get paid for a little over 16. That type of question I would go to the department secretary if you have any uncertainty about the specific number of hours that you're supposed to be working. You may also have weeks where you work, for example, if you're supposed to average 5 per week, you may have some weeks that you work 10, some weeks that you work 2, as long as it balances out to that final 70, for example, at the end of this semester. Yes, so not sure if this applies to all departments, but sometimes the secretary will email you and the professor later in the semester asking if the student has exceeded their hours. I think they can get paid more. This is true. However, we do not encourage waiting until that happens, so that you and the instructor can create a plan that works within the original agreed upon contract. However, if you are being overworked, then there are instances when you can get paid more, but it's important that you, as we've said, keep track of your hours, stay in communication with the instructor so that they know how to adjust and keep you within those hours that were originally agreed upon. When do they start paying the GAs? So this is dependent on when you submit certain forms to the graduate secretary or the department secretary, and this varies between departments as well as when that secretary is able to submit the files to whatever the next step would be for them. So there is not a hard and fast rule for that question. Will I get a certificate after this session? Laura, this may be a question that you could answer. I think there should be a record of this on the CTL website, which we can probably get into later, but I don't know if Laura, if you wanted to put anything in the chat or address that.
Yeah, I can answer this question. It's probably quicker just if I speak to it. So the CTL, when you register for this session, if you signed in with your name, so your first name, last name, we update the CTL registration database to note that you've actually attended the session. And once we've compiled this information and updated the registration database, you can log in and print a copy indicating that you've attended your workshop. It's by no means a formal certificate, as that's not something we offer, but it does note that you've attended the session.
Thank you. Okay, and now we're going to move into grading related content and questions. So you'll want to know what assignments you're responsible for marking. This is a pretty obvious concern or aspect of being a GA or TA, but if you can know that information right off the bat, then you can schedule out your semester, you can know when busier weeks will be or lighter weeks will be, as well as do I mark all of these students' assignments or will they be broken up across GAs and TAs? If it's a class that you have fellow GAs or TAs, especially a larger class, they may break it up where you mark the first half of the alphabet and the other person does the second half, for example. Or maybe you mark all of the students for this assignment and then none of the next assignment. And so not only knowing which assignment, but when as well. And when it relates to the when, it is both when the students will submit them, and that gives you an idea of when you can start the grading process, as well as when you should be expected to be done with marking those assignments. And sometimes this information will be found on the syllabus. Of course, the assignment submission date will be on the syllabus, but sometimes there may also be a date for when students will be receiving feedback. And so this can give you some indication of when you are expected to return those marks back to them. And in regard to how you will be marking, it may be helpful to ask if the instructor uses rubrics with their assignments, and if they make those rubrics, or if you are expected to create them. And you can also ask if the two of you will go over how to mark an assignment together before you have to mark them on your own. So I know I had a few instances while being an instructor this last semester where we would hop on a 1-hour Teams call and work through an assignment as a group of me and my GAs, so that I made sure that they felt comfortable doing this on their own, especially because it might be more difficult to contact me in an online or remote learning environment. I've also had instructors who did this for me as a GA, and I found it extremely helpful. And then you should also be asking how much feedback you are expected to include. And this type of question may be helpful to ask in that meeting that you have with them instead of asking it right at the beginning of the semester. And within that feedback, sometimes instructors may expect details within a document, for example, track changes or comments on a Word document, or you may be expected to have a feedback paragraph at the very end, or maybe just a number grade. It can vary quite drastically. As well as understanding any of these assignment expectations. Okay. And lastly, you want to know where you should be retrieving those assignments. So are they submitting the assignments via Blackboard, via email, and that way you know where to find them so that you can maybe download them if you need to, or mark directly on Blackboard. And asking them if you need to send the marks to the instructor before you upload them online. So I know that I did this last semester because I found it helpful to see common areas that students were excelling at or meeting expectations so that I could address that later on, as well as just seeing how the marking was going. And so it may be that you have an instructor who wants you to send the marks to the instructor prior to making them available on Blackboard, as well as knowing how the students are going to be accessing their grades. If it's on Blackboard, when do you need to make that available? Which grade column do you need to be inputting those in? Will you be responsible for making the grade column available, or will they be doing that? These are good starting point questions as it relates to grading. And now we will be doing a whiteboard where you can now ask any additional questions that you think would be helpful as it relates to grading. So we have a question of how we be using Safe Assign. Some instructors have certain percentages of cutoff values within Safe Assign. Some don't use it at all. Similarly, what's the protocol for plagiarism? If a student complains about the grade, how should I respond? Yeah, this is a really important question because it can happen in any class, and it happens in most classes at some point or another. And so knowing what your role is in that conversation with the student, maybe the instructor has a policy where if a student does have a concern with how it's graded, then the instructor will regrade it, where they could get a higher or a lower mark. And so getting an idea of those expectations will be very helpful. The instructor may also have a policy where students have 2 weeks to view an assignment, for example, and then after that 2 weeks, they can no longer ask questions about that assignment. That might be something else as it relates to asking about their grades. What other questions can you guys think of as it relates to grading or marking assignments? I also don't see any questions in the chat either. And so if that is the case, then we can move on. And now, what's this question? One more question. How will the instructor coordinate marking between the GAs and TAs? That's another great question to ask. And one way that they might do that is through rubrics in order to ensure consistency. But getting an idea of that is also a great question to ask. And so now we'll be moving on to questions related to technology. And so questions that you can ask the instructor include, how do I upload course content? So we discussed this a little bit at the very beginning, but should I be uploading it as an MP4 or a PDF? Where on Blackboard should I be uploading it? Or am I delivering it in a synchronous lecture or a synchronous format? As well as, how can I put closed captions on videos? There are great resources online about how to do this in order to ensure accessibility for all of the students. So if you are creating video-based content, we highly recommend putting closed captions on, and it's not a difficult process either. We won't be getting into that process in this workshop, but there are, like I said, many resources online that you can follow. As well as asking, do I hold office hours? And where would I host them? Is that on Blackboard? Is it on Teams? Do I need to set up the virtual classroom? As well as how often? And then what is the contact information for your fellow GAs and TAs if you have other GAs or TAs? And this can be really helpful, as well as GAs or TAs that are in your course, because they can be helpful resources throughout this semester for getting an idea of tips and tricks for being a more efficient GA, or maybe managing Blackboard if you run into a question. And so getting contact information for your peers can be very helpful. We'll be doing another whiteboard now, where you all can put down other questions that you think would be helpful to ask the instructor as it relates to technology.
I just noticed that there was one more question in the chat about grading as well.
So can we change the grade if the students complain? This, I have never been a student, GA, or instructor where the instructor was not okay with changing grades, but I would still feel like that would be dependent on the instructor. But typically you can change the grade, but there is going to be a process that you should go through before changing grades. So that would be helpful to know what the instructor's expectations are of what you should be doing or what the student should be doing, or approving, I guess, as it relates to the grade before changes occur. For example, they may want to look at it before you change the grade, or the instructor may trust your judgment as GA or TA to change the grade. Okay, and so as it relates to technology, so if a student has limited access to technology and this impairs their capability to meet deadlines, what can we do to help them? About understanding the instructor's expectations for the various circumstances that students have. And you can also notify the student if they reach out to you personally. You can notify them about different resources through the university, like accessibility services, because it may be something that the university has more resources than you have that can help them. Any other questions about technology? If we don't have any other questions, I will hand it off to Kayla.
Alrighty, thank you, Katie. Just gonna pull the PowerPoint back up. Alrighty, so now we're going to move on to step 2, which is contacting other Gs or TAs for the course. So this may not apply to everyone because you may actually be the only GA or TA for a course, but in other instances, you may have other GAs and TAs with you. So we recommend that you take advantage of having these other individuals to work with. So we suggest that you build a community. So this is an unusual time for everyone with the virtual setting, but this doesn't mean that you can't get to know the other GAs and TAs for your course. And I think it's especially important that you do so that you can help support each other in this ever-changing online environment. For instance, you may be able to actually mark together even though we are virtual. So you can use different platforms for video chatting and mark together. So an example on the screen is Microsoft Teams. However, it's important to keep in mind that whatever platform you use, make sure you're not in a room that students have access to. So ensure that you are in a private room or having a private conversation that's just between you and the other GAs or TAs, and there's no way for the students to join in on your conversation or to eavesdrop on the marking. So that further emphasizes why it's important that you become familiar with the technology so you understand the different settings and the different ways to provide access to students or to decline access to students. We also suggest that you contact other GAs and TAs in your department, as they may have additional tips and strategies for how to be a GA or TA for the course that you're assigned to. They may have already taught the course, so they have that personal experience and they've learned from their own experience and can provide you with some insight. There will likely be matters that are specific to varying departments and varying classes, so the best thing to do is to talk to someone who has already been a GA or TA for the course that you are assigned to. And step 3 is to make sure that you take ownership. So being a GA or TA is like a job. So you do have to own your duties and your responsibilities. So you're taking a great step today by attending this workshop so you can further understand your duties and responsibilities in the online setting. It's important that you also know the syllabus in detail, as this is typically the document where the instructor or professor will provide all of the details for the entire course. So for example, this may help you understand policies about how you should deal with academic dishonesty and who is responsible for providing accommodations in regards to accessibility for students. And if you're responsible to interact with students, it's your responsibility to make sure that they know how to contact you and they know where to meet with you. So Katie has already addressed this a little bit, but we're just reinforcing here that take ownership for this responsibility and make the information available for the students so that you're easy to get a hold of. And to add on to taking ownership for your placements, one of the best things you can do for yourself is to be organized. So we suggest that perhaps you invest in a planner. So this way you can keep track on everything you have to do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. Because at the start of the semester, you should have a general idea of when you're going to have different tasks. So it can help if you write this down right away at the start of the semester. So then as you get busy with your own classes, that you have an idea of when your GA or TA responsibilities are occurring. So this may include dates for assignments, when you need to submit marks for certain assignments. And one of the things you can also do at the start of the semester is actually ask the professor when they assume the busy points in the semester are going to be. So this way you may be able to actually prepare for this and change the schedule of some of your own assignments or presentations. So for instance, I know that sometimes with some of my own classes, we actually get to pick our presentation dates. So if I had talked to the professor at the start of the semester and I understood when I would have to do a lot of marking, then I would try to pick a presentation date that doesn't conflict with this busy time of marking for my GA assignment. So this is also a constant responsibility that requires constant learning. So it's important that you continue to improve your skills as a GA or TA. So take advantage of resources in preparation for this semester. You're already doing this by attending this workshop, but all of the links to other workshops and further resources will be provided as well at the end of this workshop so that you can continue to use these workshops as you continue to go out through this semester, and you might come up with more questions and you might need different sources to use to help answer those questions. Just keep in mind, resources do not expire. And once again, if you find yourself having additional questions as the semester continues, continue to capitalize on these resources. It's important that you understand the marking expectations for each assignment, and don't be afraid to ask for clarification from the instructor if you don't understand your expectations. Marking can most definitely be difficult, especially if you're marking a new form of assessment, such as a paper, so don't be afraid to ever ask the instructor for clarification. Always ask any questions you have for them. So to continue on with developing your GA or TA skills, practice with the online classroom. So rather this be using your Sandbox and Blackboard to become familiar with the virtual classroom, which we are currently in right now, or as Katie suggested, perhaps your instructor will actually have you providing office hours or lectures within Microsoft Teams. So that's important that you develop your skills to be comfortable with that platform as well. And be familiar with how to operate a course site for Blackboard. So it's much different if you're a GA or a TA compared to what you view in Blackboard if you're granted privilege as more so an instructor or a GA. So if you're going to have to upload content to the course site, become familiar with navigating and operating the site as an instructor. For example, do you know how to input grades and work with the Grade Center? as that's likely a duty you will have to do. So make sure you just take time now to become familiar with these different tasks. But I really think the first step to do is talk to your professor to see what you're actually going to have to do. And then after that, use the different resources to develop your skills to be able to accomplish your assigned tasks. So another set of resources that's important to be familiar with is know the mental health and anxiety resources on campus. So there's a student counseling center on campus, and there's counselors available to help students all throughout the semester. So this is an important resource that you can direct students to. If anything along these lines ever comes up or a student emails you, I would suggest, of course, talking with the instructor or the professor before you go on to the next step. But just be aware of these resources, because perhaps you can also help provide these resources to the instructors so they can then provide it to the students as well. Do you have any questions about anything we just discussed? And if you do, please just post it in the chat. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat yet, so we will continue on. You can also ask questions at the end of the presentation as well if you think of anything last minute. Okay, so now we're going to move on to online concerns. Starting with a poor internet connection. So I saw previously in the chat that someone apologized because they're having difficulty with their internet connection today, actually. So this is the perfect example of sometimes you can't predict what's going to be happening with your internet, and unfortunately it may be out of your control, but you can try your best to plan for this occurrence. So there are some different steps that you may take so you can find the best internet location in your home. So maybe this means that you have to be close to your router, or whatever this means, maybe one of your rooms in your house has the best internet connection, or you can invest in something like an Ethernet cord. So that's what I use when I'm at home, and that's what I'm using right now for this lecture, because I know that it'll provide me with a stable internet connection as I live somewhere where my internet connection is very poor. If you're having an online meeting and you're just having a lot of difficulty staying connected or having a good connection, then perhaps just for that meeting, try turning off your video or having the other attendees turn off their video as well, and you can just communicate via audio. As well for large groups, so this is a good example of a large group in the virtual classroom. You may actually prevent the entire class from having access to audio and video, just to provide better bandwidth for the class and a better connection. If you are responsible for having a live workshop, what are you going to do if it is the instance where your internet fails? Well, have a plan in place. So perhaps this means that you have to think of an alternative date where you will offer the workshop, or perhaps you have to pre-record something, or maybe you'll just provide students with the PowerPoint with your notes inserted so that they can essentially teach themselves. So just keep these different matters in mind and just try to brainstorm how you could solve different problems before they actually occur. If it's actually something that's beyond your internet and perhaps it's something related to Blackboard, there are different resources you can use. So you can complete training to know how to react, or you can complete a ticket to IT, who may be able to help you with your problem. And we will be sharing some links to these different resources in the following slides. So what about teaching online? What do you have to consider? Well, maybe you will teach in regards to teaching a lab, maybe you'll actually guest lecture, or maybe you'll be providing teaching to the students during your office hours. So some different things to consider are in practice problems before students come to lecture, such as think, pair, or share activities. This way they can do some work outside of the classroom, and then when they join you in the classroom setting, you can already start a discussion. A great resource in Blackboard or in the virtual classroom is the use of breakout rooms. So you can send students off into smaller groups with a question or a case study, and then they can come back and you can discuss it as a larger group. So if you will be using Blackboard and you will be providing labs or guest lectures, maybe this is something you want to become familiar with. If you're asking students questions and they don't provide the correct answer, then try re-explaining the concept. Sometimes it can be difficult to communicate in this online setting, so you might have to be patient with the students when you're trying to explain different things to them. For accessibility purposes, you want to also consider using closed captions when you're delivering different sessions as well. So as a GA, it's very likely that students will be coming to you with questions about the course. So since we are so plugged into the online setting right now, it might be difficult to try to set those boundaries for when you're going to be available to the students. So keep in mind, what are you going to do if students are asking to meet beyond office hours? Well, keep in mind that they may actually have conflicts with their other classes during your assigned office hours. So perhaps you may want to send them an email with your questions or with their questions or concerns and try to resolve the issue by email if it's simple. Sometimes this can just make the issue worse because it's harder to explain everything you're trying to say through email. So I would actually suggest trying to just meet with them at a different time outside of your office hours that works with their schedule. But of course, just make sure that you record these hours as well, because they ultimately go towards your hours. And that goes off of asking the instructor what they want to do if these instances arise where students or a lot of students are asking to meet outside of your office hours. Once again, if you're finding a question that's difficult to answer by email, use video chat. It's a lot easier to communicate. And how are you going to meet with students online? So Microsoft Teams allows you to schedule separate sessions with a specific student or students, whereas Blackboard allows breakout rooms with a specific student or students. So both of these different platforms allow different opportunities for you to be able to meet with students one-on-one. So even if you're in your virtual office hours and you have multiple students join the virtual classroom, there are different settings you can use in both of these platforms to break off into smaller groups with students. So once again, become familiar with which platform you will be responsible to use according to the guidelines from your instructor, and then understand how you can break off into private conversations with students. Okay, do we have any questions? I see that there might be some posted in the chat, which Katie already addressed, so thank you. Are there any other questions at this time? So yeah, Katie put a great, so I'm not sure of what exactly from the university there is for Microsoft Teams, but what you can do a lot of the time, as Katie already addressed, is that you can just use Google and type in the platform you're using. And then even if I do that, like if I put Blackboard or whatever question it is I have for Blackboard, then I usually add in uWindsor. And then if uWindsor does have a resource, then that usually comes up and I can use that resource. But it looks like Katie found a link for Microsoft Teams, which is awesome. Perfect. Okay, so since we're on the topic of resources, let's go on to the next section, because you might find some of these helpful. And just to reiterate, this PowerPoint will be available at the end of the session. And when it comes to all the resources, the links to the resources have been kept in the notes of the PowerPoint. So don't be too stressed about copying down any links or anything right now. So if you are responsible for working with students, there are a few resources that you can use to learn how to engage with students in this online setting, in different activities or assessments that you can use. So we'll post the links in the chat right now anyways, just so that you can have an idea of what we're discussing. And then you're already familiar with this site since you're in this workshop today, but in the coming days, there are other workshops that you can attend as well to help further develop your skills as a GA or TA before the online semester starts. And just continue to use this resource as well as new workshops come up. So there's a really helpful Wicca page, Blackboard, that the university has created. So this is another great resource that you can capitalize on if you have any Blackboard related issues, as it discusses many different matters and factors. Given our current learning situation, the university has also made some COVID-related material, and this is, once again, another source that you can use that can help you overcome any issues you may have. And a great resource that I know Katie and I used this semester as being first-time instructors and first time really having to lecture online as well. And we used Blackboard. So one resource we capitalized on was the virtual help desk. So they have extensive hours. So typically if you're like working on something in the middle of the day and you suddenly have a question, instead of having to go through the hassle of trying to find the appropriate email to contact someone, you can actually hop into this virtual classroom and they provide you with essentially live help or live feedback to help you solve the problem right away. So this is really a good resource if you're going to be using Blackboard for this semester. Just be aware of the hours they typically operate during, and this may change during different times of the semester, so just make sure that you're aware of that before you try to hop into the virtual help desk. And the great thing with the virtual help desk as well is that you can share the screens, share your screen with the experts who are helping you, so then they can see and know exactly what you're going through and can help you solve the problem you're experiencing. And some other issues that may not be related to Blackboard specifically, but are just related to different IT problems in general. You can submit a ticket, and this is the resource here or the link here where you can submit tickets to IT. They can help you with other issues you may be experiencing. Are there any other questions? So there's a question in the chat that says, would we get access to this recording after this session? So just to clarify, I'm pretty sure you will. Laura, do you mind just confirming that?
Yep, so at the end of this session, we'll send an email that includes the recording and the PowerPoint slides that Kayla and Katie were willing to share.
Are there any other questions for Katie and I at this point? Yep, so that's a good question, how to create a group in Blackboard. So really, this workshop is just to get you thinking about the different things you need to consider before you start your GA or TA responsibilities. So I would suggest capitalizing on all of the resources we have shared with you and different suggestions we have provided you with to figure out all of those little tasks. As well, there may be different workshops or different already recorded videos that you can watch to explain more specific tasks that you will need to do. So there's a question in the chat about registering late for a workshop. Perhaps Laura, you could address this, please.
That session is full for the third session today for how to use Blackboard. So unfortunately, we will not be able to accommodate adding anyone else to the session because there is a specific cap, given that it requires the workshop facilitators to create specific resource sites on Blackboard. However, we will be recording that session, so please feel welcome. I'll put my email in the chat and we can send you the recording via email.
Thank you, Laura.
And you'll also see that Laura posted a link in the chat where you all can provide feedback regarding this workshop, content, as well as any feedback for me and Kayla.
And if there are no other questions, Katie and I thank you for attending this workshop today. We hope you found it helpful. It helps to get you thinking of all of the different matters to consider as the semester starts this week. Alrighty, thank you again for attending.